come to our last Sunday through the book of James. We're in James chapter 5. We've titled the series, The Best Life. James chapter 5, he starts by getting in our kitchen. I'm just going to warn you right now. He starts with these words. Verse 1, listen, all you who are rich. And I'm just going to pause there for a minute. Because I think most of us, when we start reading chapter 5 in James, we go, well, that's not me. I'm not rich. I've got a rich uncle. He's rich. Or my boss is rich. She owns the company. Or my neighbor down the street with a Tesla, they're rich. But not me. But can I just remind you, compared especially to the developing world, no matter what level of income you have here this morning, I'm sorry to say you're rich. Where I grew up in the Sapo jungle in West Africa, if you had a pair of shoes to wear to shoes, if you didn't have to borrow your mother's flip-flop for school, you were rich. If you had a cement floor in your mud hut, if you had done that with a thatch roof, you put cement down, you were rich. If you had a flushing toilet, you'd be like the only person within 100 miles who had a flushing toilet, and you were rich. So I put together our own list of questions for all of us here in the East Valley. And so this is rhetorical. You don't have to answer this. You don't have to raise your hand. So just, this is like a self-quiz. And so I have this one first. If you need a new fridge with a TV screen on the door to show you what's inside, you're rich. Yeah, I have a picture here. Yeah, that's you. All right, so here's the thing. I saw this like, who needs that? Why do we have that? What? We can't open the door. And I had seen the ads on TV, but then I'm going through a store in town here, and I see them selling it. I don't want to mention the name of the store because then you won't shop there. That's not my point. But I thought, that's a real expensive item for Home Depot. You know, they usually have lumber and cement, but they've got TVs in this. Why can't we just open it? Anyway, let's keep going. If you have so much stuff in your garage you can't park your car, you're rich. If you think, geez, that 47-inch TV is too small to see from across the room, I need a 70-inch TV, you're rich. If you are unhappy because Amazon doesn't have one-day delivery on golf clubs, you're rich. If you've ever been melancholy and sad because you can't find a purse to match your outfit, you're rich. If you steal your kids' clothes hangers while they're at school because you have too many clothes for your hangers, you're rich. If it ruins your day when the barista forgets your whip, you're rich. If your burrito at lunch was so big you got food coma, you're rich. If you feel annoyed that it takes like a minute to get hot water in the shower, you're rich. If you complain that your slow Wi-Fi is getting you killed on Fortnite, you're rich. One of my sons literally made me call Cox because he said our ping was too slow. I didn't even know we had ping. He said it's incredibly bad. He said in Asia it's much better than this. We get ping down. I'm paying more now for something I didn't even know I need. And I said, look, it isn't the ping that's getting you killed. Some 12-year-old in Des Moines was killing him or something. I said, you know, it's your bad skills, but he wouldn't take it. We got better ping. Anyway, last one. I got one more here. If you've complained that your medical insurance doesn't cover Botox, you're rich. All right. We kind of crossed a line there, I'm sure, so we need to stop right there. But James, like I said, he gets real honest with all of us. And the things that he writes about, it's not so much about what's in our bank account. It's the condition of our heart. It's the posture of our life toward others. So follow me. Verse 1, listen, all of you who are rich, for it's time to weep and wail over the misery that will overtake you. Your riches lie rotting, your fine clothes eaten by moths, and your gold and silver are corroded as witnesses against you. You have hoarded up treasure for the last days, but it will become a fire to burn your flesh. Listen, can't you hear the cries of the laborers over the wages you fraudulently held back from those who work for you? The cries for justice of those you've cheated have reached the ears of the Lord of armies. Verse 5, you have indulged yourself with every luxury and pleasure this world offers, but you're only stuffing your heart full for a day of slaughter. Wow, that's some harsh language. What is the problem? And I'll sum it up like this. The trouble that James is talking about, he's saying, is that we tend to live rich toward me. That's the issue. And you don't have to have piles and piles of money in the bank to live rich toward me. Like I said, it's a condition of your heart. It's a posture of our soul. And the trouble that James lays out is he says, when you live rich toward me, we don't end up living the best life. We end up living the worst life. And I made this list here. We're going to put it on the screen. When you live rich toward me, for example, you expect money and possessions to make you happy. He says this, all you who are rich, it's time for you to weep over your misery that's coming. Think about it with me. The things that we want most in life don't cost $1 at all. For your kids to love you more, for your spouse to stay in love with you, it doesn't cost money, or it shouldn't at least. We'll stop there. But contentment, to have great friends and coworkers, it has nothing to do with money. The things we want most in life don't cost $1. 2, verse 2, he says, your riches lie rotting, your fine clothes are eaten by moths. In other words, you spend it all on things that don't last. And any of you that have so many clothes, you need to borrow and steal your kids' hangers because you run out. 2,000 years ago, it was the same problem. The moths come in your closet and eat holes in your clothes. Verse 3, you try to keep it all for yourself. He says, you have hoarded up treasure. His point is storing up is a bad idea because everybody, everywhere, leaves everything behind in the end, don't we? Verse 4, he says, the wages you fraudulently have held back. He said, you've taken advantage of others who have less. Let me pause here because James is talking about fair trade. I think he's way ahead of his time. He's talking about paying people a livable wage. He's talking about how we treat our employees and coworkers or subcontractors or contractors. Because just because we can take advantage of someone because they're desperate for work doesn't mean we can or we should. Before moving to Chandler, we lived in Malawi, East Africa, and tobacco and tea, they're by far the two largest produces in Malawi. And I was at a gathering with a number of tobacco farmers. It was a dinner in the community. And I was talking to one of them about his farm, and it was huge. It was a huge tobacco plantation. And we're talking about how many employees he had. And then he mentioned, and I don't know what brought this up, that he paid them the government minimum wage. And I was like, Malawi has a minimum wage? He said, yeah. I said, well, how much is it? He said, it's 30 kwaches. I said, he's 30 kwaches a day. I said, you pay your employees 30 kwaches a day? Can I tell you what 30 kwaches is? At the time, the exchange rate was 70 kwaches equaled $1. He was paying them less than 50 cents a day. I'd only known this guy for like 5 minutes, and I said, why would you do that? And he said, well, because the government said that's a minimum wage. I said, but just because the government said a grown man or grown woman can't live on 50 cents a day. You know that. I hardly knew the guy, and I got in his grill. Maybe I shouldn't have. But just because we can take advantage of someone doesn't mean we should. Okay, the last one I have here, James 5, verse 5, he says, you indulge in all the wrong things. He says, you've indulged in every kind of luxury and pleasure this world offers. What's at the heart of this? What's at the heart of this passage? I think one of the most ignored, but one of the most interesting and fascinating things in the New Testament when we read Jesus' words or Bible writers like James is the connection they make between money and possessions and the condition of our soul. I think most of us would assume that pastors and preachers shouldn't ever use money and spirituality in the same sentence, but Jesus did all the time. James does what his own brother does, is he points out that how we handle money and possessions matter. So I have this on the screen. If you're writing anything down, take this key idea home with you. How we handle and think about our money and possessions, it affects the condition of our soul. It really does. There is a big connection there. And so I've laid out the problem that James puts in front of us. But what is the best life? You know, this whole series we've titled The Best Life. The best life, I said the problem is to live rich toward me. The best life, I'll say it like this, is to live rich toward God. Now, those aren't my words. Those are Jesus's words. I don't know if you remember in Luke chapter 12, he tells a story about money and possessions. And he tells about a very affluent, successful businessman. He says this guy is a is a farmer. He grows grain, and he had built barns, and he was storing all his grain up in his barns and his storehouses. But then one harvest, he had this massive return, just more than he could fit, more grain than he could fit in his barns and his silos. So the man says, Jesus said, he starts to think, what should I do with all of this excess? I have more than enough. He says, then the light turns on for the man. The man goes, I've got it. I'll build bigger barns and store up even more. That way I can retire early, like at 43 years old or something. And Jesus says this, and I can take it easy the rest of my life. Let's see how God answers him. This is verse 20. But God says to this man, Luke chapter 12, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. And so you see, I want to use these words of Jesus this morning. Live rich toward God. Now, what does it mean when Jesus says live rich toward God? I think the first thing I would do, I'll use this language to describe it. I think he's saying invest in heaven. I think in life, this life that we live, there are temporary things, there are short-term things, and there are forever things, aren't there? Heaven, your soul, lives on and lasts forever, so invest in heaven. But there's a lot of temporary things that we can spend money and use money on and use our possessions for. Have you ever spent money on something and you go, ooh, that was over quick? You know, that was gone quicker than I thought it would be. I was reading recently about a rookie who was signed by the Houston Texans. His name is K.J. Dillon. And K.J. Dillon is a safety, and they sign him, and he comes into camp on his rookie contract, and he made a rookie mistake. Some of the veterans invited him out to dinner, but what he didn't know is that the veterans during camp will leave the rookies with a bill. So they go to Papa's, and people are ordering steak and lobster and filet mignons, and at the end of dinner, they give K.J. Dillon the bill, and he looks at it, and it's $16,255. And he was like, what in the world? How did it get so high? And KJ says this, I'm on a rookie contract. I don't know if I'm going to make it. And I only ordered a Caesar salad for $13. That's true. But he had to pay the bill. Can I tell you what it's like walking to the parking lot and getting in your car after a meal like that? It's gone. You know, whatever, $16,000, it's gone. It's not coming back. You're never getting that back again. And there's so many things in life that are temporary and don't last at all. James says it like this in chapter 5, verse 2. He says, your riches lie rotting, your fine clothes are being eaten by moths, and your gold and silver are corroded. When he says these things, like our possessions don't last much, but we give them so much time and attention and pay more attention to them than to most things in life. He echoes the words of Jesus. When we started this series, I had reminded you that so much of what James says, he's echoing the words of his brother Jesus. In Matthew chapter 6, if you want to turn there with me, Jesus says something a lot like this. We have it on the screen. He says, do not store up for yourselves treasure on earth, where moths and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasure in heaven. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Do you see why I say invest in heaven? You know, where your heart, where your soul is, that's what matters most. So invest in heaven. So much, like I said, of what we go through in life is temporary and short term, but we keep treating it like it will last forever, and it just won't. Let me use this as an example, and maybe this idea will stick with you. Let's say you want to go on vacation to San Diego. It's hot, it's June, you can't wait to get out of here, so you book a VRBO for a week, right? And the pictures that they had on the internet were really good. You could see the ocean from the patio, and so you book it. But when you arrive and you open the door of the condo for the week, you're like, holy 1990s. You know, nothing's been updated. You're horrified when you walk in, and you see in the kitchen they have laminate countertops. Oh my goodness. Can you even eat a meal prepared on laminate? And in the kitchen right next to it is an almond colored fridge. You know, it makes you want to lose your appetite. And you stumble in the bathroom, and the tub is made out of fiberglass with a cheap fiberglass walls, the builder special. Like, can I really get clean in this? And there's carpet everywhere. I haven't seen carpet for years. Who's laying carpet anymore? And you just can't take it. So you call a contractor, and you ask the contractor to come in and start to remodel the place, because this is just absurd. And so every day that week, as you go to the beach, the contractor is coming in, and the first thing that he does is he pulls up the carpet and he lays Brazilian mahogany hardwood on the floors. And then he puts quartz, takes out that cheap laminate, puts quartz countertops in the kitchen. In the bathroom, he pulls out the cheap fiberglass walls and he puts in marble. Are you kidding me? And it's shining. And then, of course, in the kitchen, he puts up that fridge. He puts in one of those fridges, takes out, we got a picture of it here. It's coming. There we go. And he puts up there we got it. And like, of course you need that. Can I just pause here? Why is anyone buying those? Can we not just open the door? What happened to us, America? Okay, so anyway, by the end of the week, you've spent $50,000. But do you know what happens at Saturday at 12 o'clock? You have to leave. You got to give them the keys and go back to Zonyland and come back here. And yet you can't take it with you. But you know what? We do this, don't we? We keep spending so much on earth and investing in ourselves and living rich toward me. And Jesus says, and James says, live rich toward God. Pour into your spiritual development. Invest in growing spirit. Invest in your relationship with God. Invest in knowing the Bible. Invest in growing a godly heart. Invest in knowing God. That's what matters most. Invest in heaven. I wrote this next. What does it mean to live rich toward God? I have invest in people. They live on forever, don't they? That actually comes from Josh's song titled Live On Forever. Let's go back to Luke chapter 12. And in Luke chapter 12, Jesus, after he tells the story, the parable about barns and silos and storage units and garages, he says this. He says, life is more than food, especially a $16,000 meal in Houston, and your body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storehouses or barns, yet God feeds them. How much more valuable are you than the birds? Do you see what he's saying here? He's saying you matter. The people around you matter most. They live on forever. People last forever. So invest in changing lives. Invest in pouring into people. Jesus, when he was here, the first thing he said was, I will make you fishers of people. I'm going to send you out to invest in people. And Jesus spent just about every waking minute, it seems like, when you read about his life on earth and his ministry, investing in people and pouring into people that were close to him. I think sometimes we think we can do this life, this spiritual life after God, on our own. But relationships are the fuel, are the gasoline of growing a heart for God. So pour into the people around you. One of our great godly responsibilities as followers of Jesus Christ is to invest in people and lead those around us toward God. God puts friends and coworkers and family members around you every day. Are you pouring into their lives? Are you helping to change their lives and lead them towards eternity with God? That's one of your great callings on earth. As I say that, I can't help but think of my own great-grandfather. I knew him well. He lived to be 99 years old, my great-grandfather. His name is John D. Crummey. We just called him Bomp, B-O-M-P. He was around till I was well into high school. But most of his life, he had gone to church, kind of, but then he met Bill Bright. And this was in the early 70s, and Bill Bright led him to Jesus Christ. Really, for the first time in his life, he gave his life to Jesus Christ. And then at the same time, my father was pastoring a church in northern Washington, in Clallam Bay, way up as far north as you can go. And Bomp came to visit us, my great-grandfather. And as he's talking to my father, he says this to my father. He says, Jack, he said, I've given my family everything they could ever want in life, but I've never given them Jesus Christ. You see, he hadn't really become a Christian into his mid-80s, and now it was bothering him that so many of his family, and there's a lot of us, he said, did not know Jesus Christ. And he started to weep as he talked to me. He says, I've given them everything. And when he says, I've given them everything, he really had. And he had started a company called FMC in San Jose in the 1940s. And it had grown. It was extremely successful. He had invented a dye that you inject in Florida oranges to make them orange. I don't know if you know this, but California oranges are, when they're ripe, they're orange. In Florida, the oranges are ripe when they're green with an orange dot, but people on the West Coast won't buy them because they want orange oranges. So he invented this dye that you inject in the Florida oranges to make them orange. And then during World War II, he invented an amphibious tank, and the military bought thousands of his amphibious tanks. And then he won the contract for the Bradley fighting vehicle, and his company started making the Bradley fighting vehicle. And then he had the FMC link belt crane, which is on just about every construction site in the country. So he had done well, and he had passed his wealth on down to his children and his grandchildren, not to his great-grandchildren, but to his children and grandchildren. And so he had given them everything, and he tells my father, but I've never given them Jesus Christ. Not long after he left our house in Washington, he sent a letter to every family member. And the letter was an invitation to Maui, of all places. And then in the letter, it said, on Wednesday, when we're in Maui, at 5 o'clock, I want everyone to meet on my veranda at the hotel. And so while we're in Hawaii, I was small, but I remember it well, about 80-something of us gathered outside on the veranda outside of his hotel room. And he sat everybody down, and then he took out his Bible, and he started in the book of Genesis, and he started teaching his family, dozens and dozens of them, the story of Jesus Christ, going book by book, showing how it all pointed to Jesus Christ. Then he got to the Gospels, and he explained how Jesus Christ died for their sins, and then he rose again, and then he got all the way to Revelation to talk about heaven. It took him almost 2 hours, and then he invited his own family to receive Christ. Do you know why he did that? Because he knew that he had been living rich toward me. And it was time to live rich toward God. And God put his family in front of him to invest in them first and change their lives. And that's how he spent the rest of his life, was trying to change every family member towards heaven. How to live rich toward God. Invest in heaven, invest in people. I'll end with this thought, and I have one more, and it's this: invest in generosity. So, like I said, James, it's easy to see that James is very frustrated with how stingy people are living. He says this: you have hoarded up treasure, in verse 3. And the challenge buried underneath all of it, is to live more generously, to invest in generosity. When we read about the New Testament church, we read about an exorbitantly generous church. For example, Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, and this is 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and he starts bragging on the Greek Christians in Macedonia. I have to read this to you. He says, they are being tested by many troubles, and they are very poor, but they are also filled with abundant joy, which is overflowed in rich generosity. When you read about the church in Acts, when you read about the church in Greece, they were exorbitantly generous with everyone, even in their poverty. When I read that passage this last week, it hit me that one of the most generous seasons I've ever seen in any church anywhere in the world was at the Grove during our season of poverty. We had it here, our season of trouble. And most of you were here during the Great Recession. I'm going to put it at 2008 to 2013. During that 5-year span, I've never seen a church anywhere be so generous. And this is at the same time when the first time in my life I saw people lose their houses to foreclosures, short sales. Dozens and dozens of friends of mine were losing their jobs. But our church was generous. Paul, Gunther, and I hung our heads this last week, and we put together a list of some of the things that the Grove, did during this season of poverty. We, for example, built a church on a mountain in Haiti that had fallen during the earthquake. 2, we sponsored during this 5-year season more than 500 orphans and children living in extreme poverty. 3, we donated and shared more than 2,000 pairs of shoes in Africa. 4, we shared more than 3,000 boxes of Thanksgiving dinners in Chandler. 5, we dug 4 wells in rural Malawian villages. 6, we built a dorm for orphans in Port-au-Prince. 7, on one day, you, the people of the Grove, gave $110,000 to rebuild a church, to rebuild a college in Africa, African Bible College. 8, you built a medical clinic in Malawi. 9, you built a girls' dorm and 2 more staff houses in Liberia. 10, you hung 2,000 mosquito nets in Malawian village huts. This was in the middle of an economic crisis. Thank you for applauding that. You're right. And I share that to say the generosity here, like Paul Gunther said earlier, it didn't stop in 2013. We get to see it week in and week out. I was just going over, working on our 2020 budget, what it would look like for next year. So we're looking back at year-end 2018. And as I look back at year-end 2018, I was shocked to see, because I don't always see all the numbers in one line, but to see what we, the Grove, gave away through our Serve the World ministries locally and globally. In 2018, you, the Grove, allowed us to give away more than $250,000. More than, thank you. We can applaud that. To me, that's incredible. I couldn't believe when I saw it, but that was to sponsor pastors in Liberia. That was to pay orphanage directors in Haiti and pastors in Haiti. That was to sponsor and to cover all of our Live, Love Malawi work through over a dozen community development workers. That was to sponsor our modern-day abolitionist work in Thailand. And then, on top of it, at the end of 2018, you at the Grove, we were still able to purchase this 2 acres of land next door, and we hit budget. So that's the best part, maybe. So let me end with this. Jesus' underlying challenge, James' underlying challenge, was for us to live more generously, to change the posture of our life from holding on so tightly to sharing more with others, and see what God does with that. So I want to invite you to do something right now that once in a while we do at the Grove, all right? So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. So take your wallet or your purse out and hold it in your hands. Could everybody do that? If you don't have a wallet or a purse, then grab your iPhone, because I know you have Apple Pay on it. So whatever your source of payment is, take that out and hold it in your hands. All right. And hold on to that. Now, as you hold on to that, it feels very precious, doesn't it? So many of our hopes and dreams are wrapped up in this, aren't they? And some call this the temple of the 21st century. And it's very hard for us to let go of it. We think, we're told in our country, save up for a rainy day. You don't know what bad things, so we hold on so tightly. But living generously, as Jesus and James talk about, means letting go. So every once in a while, we ask you at the Grove to do this. I want you to turn to the person sitting next to you, and they probably, or could be a complete stranger, and I want to ask you to give them your wallet. Here, we're gonna trade here. And I want to ask you to give them your wallet or purse, and it's all fine. I took all the cash out. I knew we'd be doing this, and so I'm good on this. Yeah, I'm kidding. I never have any cash. All right, did everyone make the change? You have to, I'm not joking. You have to exchange it with somebody sitting next to you. This feels really uncomfortable, so let go, take someone else's. All right, everyone have it in their hands. How does that feel to let go of your purse or your wallet or your iPhone? That's even worse. Some of you are breaking out in cold sweats. I can see it, right? You're shaking. But it's freeing, isn't it? I've just let go. It's kind of freeing. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to ask the ushers to bring the buckets back, and we're going to take an offering. And I want to ask you to give like you've never given in your entire life. Just let it all go. All right. All right, now you got to give people their wallets back now. You got to do that. All right, everybody hand them back. Some people are leaving. Don't leave with those. Yeah, I see that. Before it gets a little too weird, I'll end with this challenge. Living generously isn't something we wake up one morning and we just do, like, oh, I'm a generous person. It doesn't happen. It becomes a discipline. It becomes a practice. It becomes something we budget for. I want to invite you to this Old Testament practice of tithing. I don't know how many of you here tithe, but I invite you to start tithing. For the Hebrew people, it was 10% of their income. They knew clearly that 10%, for example, in Leviticus, it says 10% of what you get belongs to God, and it is holy to Him. The Jewish people knew if I kept that first 10%, I was stealing from God. Can I invite you to that practice of giving the first, they called it their first fruits, the first 10% of your income to God. Practice that. I want to invite you to this practice as part of it. Some call it the 10-10-80 rule. The first 10% goes to God. The next 10% you need to save, because one day you'll have a tranny go out, and if you don't have something saved up, you'll go into debt. Or one day you'll be between jobs and you'll go into debt if you haven't saved up. So first 10% goes to God, next 10% put away. And then live on 80%. That's really hard, because the average American lives literally on 120% of what they make. But start living that way. And Jesus says this, when we go back to Matthew 6, He says, your heart will follow your investment in heaven. Start giving it away. Start investing in heaven. Start holding on more loosely, living generously, and pouring into people and pouring into your relationship with God. And it changes everything.